Good morning, Divakar. It's nice to see you. I've been talking to you.
Same here, sir. Same here, sir.
We can start whenever you are ready. I have no issues.
Sir, we will start now itself. We'll start
Very
now.
well.
It is already
Very
12. So, Divakar ji,
Yes, sir.
slowly शुरू कीजिए.
Okay, sir. So, good morning, everyone. Respected dignitaries, academicians, professionals, dear students. I, Divakar Das, Placement Manager of ICFI Law School, the ICFI University, Dehradun, welcome Major General Praveen Kumar Sharma for today's special lecture session on rights of prisoners of war. It's such a vast topic, sir will be taking. The participant and attendants will keep and put themselves mute during the session, and they can write their queries in the chat box, which may be taken later on the session. The feedback link for certificates will be shared at the end of the session. Now, I welcome Professor Dr. Yugal Kishore, Dean ICFI Law School, Dehradun, for a brief introduction of law school and his opening remark. Sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Divakar ji. Respected Major General Sahab, the keynote speaker of today's special guest lecture on rights of the prisoner, Mr. P.K. Sharma ji, the academic coordinator, Madam Monica Kharola, organizers of this particular event, Mr. Divakar ji and Dr. Mriganshi Wilson, academicians and professionals pan-India, and dear student friends. Today, we are having a special guest lecture by a very learned personality who is having a vast experience in the field of defense on the topic of rights of the prisoner. And on this occasion, I wholeheartedly, from my side, from the ICFI University side, and from the side of all the participants, with folded hand, welcome to this special guest lecture. Sir, I know you are an extremely busy person and a very learned scholar, but even despite all these, you have spared your valuable time to enlighten us, to motivate us, and to inform us about the rights of the prisoners of war. For that, we are very much grateful to you and thankful to you. And we understand this is a topic in our curriculum also. So my students will be much more benefited. And of course, academicians and professionals will be equally enlightened by your great lecture. But as my friend, Mr. Divakar Das Sahab has said that I must speak something about the university and law school. So therefore, I would like to inform everyone, of course, most of my students, they know that ICFI Dehradun was established in the year 2003 by an eminent educationist and a great education builder who has built as many as 11 universities in the university in the country, Mr. N.J. Yashasvi. And his motto was that this should be an institution of super excellence. So with that motto, right from the year 2003, the faculties, administration, as well as the students and the staff has been working. With the result, this year, I can say that university has been ranked as 34th in the category of real impact at the world level. We call it as URI, World University Ranking on Real Impact at the world level, and ICFI University is ranked as 34. This ICPAI University, when the COVID-19 came, at that time has switched over to the digital mode. And because of its proficiency, it has been accorded the e-lead certificate for digital education. That means that means online teaching, learning, and research. Further, this year, the university has been accorded at World Education World Ranking among the top 100 universities at the level of 46 in private universities in India. So we have got, and of course, we are the first in Uttarakhand. I need not say that. Once we are there at the university world ranking, so naturally we are first in the Uttarakhand. Similarly, when the university was established, the four schools were established. One of them was law school. The other one was education school. Third one was management school, and the fourth one was tech school. So here at law school also, we have worked very efficiently right from the beginning to establish it at the as an institute of super excellence, with the result that IIRF has ranked 13th among the national top 50 law schools of India in this year. Further, the CSR, the GHRDC has awarded a rank at the 5th in top law schools of India with super excellence. So we are the 5th among the top law universities of India in super excellence by CSR and GHRDC ranking. And last year, we have been awarded as the best law school at the Himalayan states in India. So there are as many as 11 Himalayan states, and we are the best law college among them. So with this, now I will be coming over to this lecture. You see, this prisoner of war and their rights have been a relevant subject right from the beginning. If you look at the history, in our Mahabharata, in our Ramayana, as well as throughout the ancient history, India has been a country which has always respected the rights of the prisoners of war. Further, we know at the Western world, in the year 1984, a conference at Brussels was prepared for a declaration on rights of prisoners at war. But of course, that could not be ratified by most of the countries. Then in the year 1899, 1907, international conference had then the rules of conduct during war were recognized. They were recognized by the international law. But when the First World War was there, these rights were basically seen as in violation than in obedience. Therefore, there was in between, Geneva Conference was also there in the year 2029. But some countries ratified it and some did not ratify it. Then after World War, when the UN came up, then Geneva Conference of 1949 was there, and the rules of engagement during the war has been fixed. And therefore, the rights of the prisoners have been recognized fully well. Now, today, with this introduction, I can simply say that we have a very learned, experiential person in the field of defense who will be speaking on rights of the prisoners of war. So I have welcomed him on your behalf and on my behalf. Now, I request my placement officer, Mr. Divakar Das ji, to briefly introduce staff. Or else, if madam is introducing, you can give it to her. Sir, your voice is not audible.
Sir, I welcome my learned colleague, Dr. Mrigangsi Wilson, for welcome address. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, sir. Major General P.K. Sharma, Professor and Director at Amity Law School and Dean Faculty of Law, Amity University, Gurugram, Haryana. He is adaptable, approachable, courteous, and an active administrator. In the past, he was Judge Advocate General, Indian Army. Sir has also worked at Indian Institute of Military Law, Kanti, a Category A establishment of Indian Army, which imparts training in matters like maintenance of discipline and administration of justice to the officers of the three services, that is Army, Navy, Air Force, and also to paramilitary forces. The institute is one of its kind in the whole of Asia to train the defense services officers in the military and allied laws. Sir retired from the post of JAG after serving Indian Army for almost 4 decades. Presently, he is leading Amity Law School, Gurugram, as the director. Today, we are glad and proud to bring a small conversation with him on rights of prisoners of war. Over to you, sir. So please.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Dr. Wilson. I am humbled by the good words spoken by you about me. And in fact, that puts a lot of pressure with what Dr. Yugal Kishore said and what you have spoken. So that puts an additional burden, well knowing the competence of today's students. But nonetheless, I am extremely grateful to ICFAI Law School, ICFAI University, Dehradun, for giving me this opportunity of coming and interacting with the students. One thing that I must mention is I think it's a matter of happiness and pride. I know how I got connected to ICFAI. One of your students attended a lecture addressed by me somewhere else, and then she came back to me saying, "Sir, can you address us?" And the university accepted the request. So that shows what good relations and how much weightage you give to your students. That's wonderful. And no wonder, Dr. Yugal Kishore, that your university and your law school has so many achievements. Definitely, it's a matter of pride for you. And I compliment each one of you for achieving this greatness. I'm grateful to you, Dr. Yugal Kishore. You are yourself an eminent academician for sparing your time today. I am not an academician.
Yes, sir, you are academicians. Yeah. You are a great academician, sir. I know you.
basically, Fauji. But yes, I had interest. So I was part of the raising of the Institute of Military Law at Kanti. And now, after retirement, though I am a 4th generation lawyer, I did not choose to practice. I thought of giving back what the service had given to me. Some service, if I can be to the young students, we can impart some good knowledge to them with my limited knowledge, whatever I have. So I will be using a PPT. There is nothing very special or anything about it. Dr. Yugal Kishore has already mentioned how this rights develop the rules of engagement. So ultimately, coming to the 3rd Geneva Convention, which deals with the prisoners of war. So I'm going to concentrate on that. I'm sure you are covering it as a subject with you. But let me begin with anyone who knows what has been the largest number of prisoners of war which has been held by any country till now. Anybody? Because I was a little surprised when I searched Google. I was a little surprised. You know, Google was showing that during the long US-Vietnam War, there were 766 POWs, out of which 114 died in captivity. But I mean, as an officer of the Indian Army, I feel very proud that in the 1971 Indo-Pak conflict, which liberated the East Pakistan and created Bangladesh, we had 93,000 prisoners of war. And I mean, there were no ho-halla, no violations which were reported. And then, of course, we repatriated all the prisoners of war because of the 1972 pact which we had in Shimla between Mrs. Indira Gandhi and Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. In that, there were 79,676 uniformed prisoners of war. I mean, it was one of the biggest surrender by any country. Forget the armed forces, I would say by any country. So after the Shimla Agreement, all the prisoners of war were repatriated. I was studying in Agra, St. Peter's, Agra, and one of the major prisoner of war camps was established in Agra. So also, you know, sometimes some people wonder, even in our own life, in the society, we wonder, there are heinous crimes committed, but still to the accused, or when he is convicted, he becomes a prisoner, you want to give him some relevant fundamental rights or his rights. So one wonders why he's committed such a heinous crime. He's murdered somebody. There's a mass rape or something of that nature. Why should he be entitled to any right? But then, after all, we are all human beings. We are all liable to make mistakes. So there is a need for correction. And a prisoner of war, we have to realize that a soldier from the enemy country is also performing his duty by fighting a war for his country, like a soldier of the Indian Armed Forces is performing a right by going to the war if the country declares a war. So it becomes a part of the duty. So when we are performing our duties, we should be entitled to all the rights, unless of course, I commit a war crime, then it's a separate issue and that can be handled differently. Well, now, as Dr. Yugal Kishore was mentioning, that in our country, from times immemorial, or in the world, human race has seen innumerable conflicts, and each maybe more dastardly than the previous one. Every civilization and every religion cherished ideas of morality, right? And spirituality. So gradually we evolved as a human being. Now, you all know what transformed Ashoka when he, after the famous Kalinga war, when he saw the massacre, the infrastructure, the trees, not only the human beings, the animals, everything massacred. That transformed him, right? So Buddhism, in your own wars, Mahabharata or Ramayana, you have seen lessons of treating the other side humanly. So therefore, as Dr. Yugal Kishore mentioned, gradually it developed and we came to a consensus, and we came up with the Third Geneva Convention, which handles the rights of prisoners of war. And India was amongst the very first countries to adopt those Geneva Convention, and we follow the Geneva Conventions very religiously. So if you permit me, I will share the screen. Let me see if, can you see the screen, please?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, we are
Okay.
capable of seeing.
Okay. So, as I said, rights of prisoners of war. So, two words that come to us when before we go to the rights. First is what is a war? What is a war? So, if you go to the Webster's dictionary, it will tell you it's a state of usually open and declared armed hostile conflict between states or nations. So I'm not going into, as of now, I'm not going into the difference between state or nation that can be taken up subsequently. But what Dr. Oppenheim said was, see, it's basically two parties trying to overpower each other and trying to impose our conviction, our own conditions over the other side. So that is a war between the two people. दो पहलवान कुश्ती लड़ते हैं तो वही होता है कि कौन दूसरे को हराएगा. तो that is a war. And since everywhere there are certain rules, so certain rules within the paraphernalia, within the parameters of those rules, this armed conflicts takes place. So that is a war. But who's a prisoner? Right? Who's a prisoner? So a person you have taken into confinement of captivity and you are depriving him of his liberty against his will. He's been taken into custody and forget the Indo-Pak war where there was a surrender. Normally, you forcibly take people into captivity and they become prisoner of war. So this is a very simple definition I'm going to give you there. You can go and describe a prisoner in very many words. This is a normal prisoner. Now, when we come to who is a prisoner of war, the definition, it's a longish definition, which is given under Article 4 of the Geneva Convention. So basically, if we see all the sub articles of Article 4, what comes out is, firstly, they are members of the armed forces of the two parties which are under conflict, or they are part of their militia or volunteer corps which are forming part of the armed forces, right? Sometimes it happens that there may be a restriction on having a particular number in your armed forces. So there are militia groups or there are volunteer corps which can join the armed forces during the conflict. So they are, if any member is taken into custody, then he should qualify these definitions. Like what was happening in Bangladesh, what was happening in so-called East Pakistan. There was resistance, organized resistance, which was taking place because it was East Pakistan. So it was not a nation by itself. So when the Mukti Vahini was an organized movement, but what was essential for such a organized resistance or a party to the conflict, they must satisfy the 4 conditions which are given here. It is not that everybody is a king in that. Everybody is the boss there. No, it is like a proper force where you are commanded by a superior who's responsible for the actions of his subordinates. It's not lawlessness in that organized movement also, right? Then they must be very clearly, you can make out, okay, this person belongs to that particular organized resistance because he has to be wearing a fixed distinctive sign, maybe a type of a uniform or some emblem or something. And he's carrying arms openly. It's not surreptitious. He is part of the armed conflict, very openly carrying arms, and they are conducting the operations in accordance with the laws and customs of the war. There are laws, as Dr. Yugal Kishore mentioned, there Hague Conventions, laws of war, they're very clearly defined how a war will take place. So then there may be people who are not within that country, but still they profess allegiance to a particular place, they will also be part of it. And then there are followers, the civilian personnel who are followers, like your contractors, your dhobi, nai, cooks, who are not actually part of the armed force, but they regularly are moving with the armed forces. So they also, if anybody is taken amongst them, is taken prisoner of war, let's say a cook is taken, who's not a regular member of the armed force, but he's accompanying the armed forces for their cooking purposes, is taken prisoner of war, he will have the same rights as a uniformed person. So there may be certain, in times of war, what happens is we have to garner a lot of resources. So you requisition civilian trucks, you requisition boats, ships, and all those people, then they become part of, they come under you. So even those people, if they are taken prisoner of war, will be entitled, unless of course there are certain other rules and regulations where they get more benefits, then they will be covered by that. Otherwise, they also become part. If they are taken into custody, then they will also be treated as prisoners of war. And then the inhabitants of non-occupied territory, let's say when you are approaching, when in the war, when you are approaching the country under which you are in conflict, and suddenly they form into a group, and they start fighting against you, then if you take them prisoner, if you arrest them, they will also become prisoners of war. So it's a longish definition, but generally, now what happens is, in a war, as we said, that there have to be laws of war, you have to have some rules, regulations. Why should you go to a war? What are the 5 fundamental principles that you should go for a war? Now, there could be a military necessity, right? What happened if somebody is trying to take over your territory, or somebody is infiltrating, or so there is a military necessity. You have an objective in mind, it becomes indispensable that you must go for a war. So there has to be a military necessity. No unnecessary sufferings, follow the laws of war, and whatever injury you cause must be justifiable. You cannot be just unnecessarily bombarding the civilian place and all. So there has to be no unnecessary suffering. Proportionality. Now, in proportionality, what happens is, we keep hearing about Israel, right? Israel has bombed in the Palestine, a civilian area. I was fortunate to go and attend an international conference organized by the Israel Armed Forces. And they took us to those areas and they showed us why they have to bomb a civilian establishment. There are houses. They showed us tunnels which are coming from Palestine right under the military camps of Israel and opening up in fields in the Israel's territory. And how? From a civilian house, they are digging from the house a tunnel which is passing into the Israeli territory. And they come to know, okay, this is a house which is being used for this purpose. Now it is being used by the enemy for this purpose. So they have to bombard that particular thing. Now, suppose a hospital is being used for military, not for treating the patients, but for this purpose. So they have to bomb that particular hospital. But then every armed force has to keep in mind the proportionality. If I hit there, what damage it is going to cause to other civilians who are not involved in the war. So that has to be kept in mind, that proportionality. Now, no distinction, no discrimination. When you go, it is your military objective, fight the combatants and try to achieve your military objective. And lastly, honor. So respect the other side in a war, like in Mahabharata or in the olden times, golden epic times. If 6 o'clock the bugle is sounded, all hostilities end, and then you are not being discourteous to the other side. Maintain that respect. Number of times you must have seen certain ads that India and Pakistan is exchanging sweets. The Chinese are very fond of Indian cigarettes. So when you go to their border, so there is a normal respect and honor for the human being. But when you go for a war, you are fighting for your country and you are performing a duty. But still, what the 5 principles demand: be fair and have mutual respect among yourselves. So these 5 things are to be followed when you go for a war. Now, what are the rights? Now we come to the rights. So basic rights, and as I mentioned to you initially only, that everybody, howsoever heinous offense he may have committed, is entitled to certain rights. Now, please imagine yourself as a normal person. What rights do you want to have? What rights? I'm not talking about a prisoner. I'm talking about as a normal human being. What rights do you want? I must have roti, kapda, makan. I must have respect for myself, person. The others must treat me humanely, and my country, my laws must give me an equal treatment like everybody else. I must be able to profess my religious, intellectual, and physical rights. Whatever is to be given to others, I must get the same type of medical treatment. And then, even if I commit an offense and if I have to be taken to task, then the disciplinary or judicial, whatever type of proceedings we will have, I must get my rights in that also. So that summarizes my whole life. These are my rights in my whole life, right? So then we have seen what is a war. We've seen what is a prisoner. We have seen why, if you go for a war, then what is the 5 basic fundamental principles. And in a nutshell, what are the rights of a human being? A prisoner is also a human being. So I'm basically restricting myself to the 3rd Geneva Convention, which prescribes these rights. And as you all know, not much has changed after the 3rd Geneva Convention in the rights that have been added. Some additional protocol or not, to which India initially did not become a party to it. So nothing much has been added to it except these rights. Now, how you interpret as a lawyer, how you interpret these rights. So I have divided them in this sequence, as I mentioned to you earlier. So human treatment, respect for the person, equality of treatment. And if I'm taken a prisoner of war, you can't force me. I will come to this. You can't force me to divulge more than the required information. Then I must have proper stay, food and clothing, roti, kapda or makan, hygiene and medical, religious, intellectual and physical activities. It is not that you will put me into a 6x6 cell and I'm not allowed to move out and conduct my physical activities. I'm correspondence. And that's very important. I remember during the 62 and 65 wars when radios used to be there. Today, there are televisions. When radios used to be there, very frequently, there used to be a time on the radio when a prisoner would come and say, I am so-and-so, I belong to such and such place, I am fine here, the armed forces are treating me very well. So that was how they were corresponding with their family members through radio. Otherwise also, in writing also, they can send letters and receive letters. Today, now there are telephones also where a prisoner is permitted to speak on telephones. Then if I commit an offense as a prisoner of war, what is the procedure of taking action against me, and what are the offenses that can for which I can be tried, and what is the punishment that can be awarded to me. And when it is being done, that disciplinary proceeding is taking place, I have my proper rights of defense as a person of the armed forces of the country where this is taking place, right? So these are the basic rights. We will quickly go through one by one. I'm not going to read much of it, because once you know and part of your subject that these are part of Third Geneva Convention, I've just summarized them for your convenience. I'm sure your teachers have also done that, probably in a better manner. But for me, I have summarized them in this particular manner. So humane treatment, one doesn't have to wonder much about it. Treat them humanly. We are all aware of what happened in one of the Guantanamo prison, where 2 American soldiers, the video was released when they are urinating on a prisoner. That is inhuman treatment. That is it's more or less a war crime, right? So a humane treatment, and you can't take unnecessary action against a prisoner of war, which is prohibited by the Geneva Convention. So treat him humanly, treat him as you will treat your own prisoner. The respect for the person. As you can't be ill-treating a person inside a prison. We don't treat our soldiers, right? Our soldiers, when he's convicted and if he's undergoing imprisonment in military custody, he is treated as a regular soldier. Yes, he's in captivity. He's brought out. He's made to do exercises. He's made to do labor. But he gets the same food which the other soldiers are treating. We don't ill-treat him. It is that in winters, everybody else is wearing good woolen clothing, but he's a prisoner, so isko banyan mein hi rehne do. No, they are respected. And if there are women prisoners, then you keep them separately and you respect them as favorably as you respect the men or as you respect the women of your own country. So equality of treatment, no distinction, whatever they may be, any race, caste, color, creed, their political belief, or whatever it is, nationality. In times of war, your emotions get charged up. You become highly emotional. Oh, Pakistan, isko maar do. If one of your soldier is taken prisoner of war and is ill-treated there, then there are debates on the television saying how they have done this and we must do this and we must do that. Good, part of the emotions, but not part of your human conduct. So there has to be equality of treatment irrespective of what that prisoner of war is. As I mentioned to you, once you have a prisoner of war, all soldiers are during war, they go in their uniform. Now it is up to that particular force whether you want your officers to be wearing their ranks or you don't want them to be wearing their ranks. Suppose they are caught, you don't want that people should know your officers have been apprehended or not, but they are entitled to it. So when you apprehend a person, when a person from the other side is taken a prisoner of war, these are the only things he should be asked to provide. Obviously, we would probe him more, but these are the only thing which the Geneva Convention directs that he can be made to provide: name, surname, rank, date of birth, and his army number. like in the army, the officers are known as IC and then a number. When I get commissioned, at what number I have got commissioned? Like I say, IC 37738. So Indian commission 37738. Probably I am the 37,738 officer to have got commissioned in the army. So this is what they are only entitled to provide. For any other thing, you cannot torture or you cannot compel a prisoner. On the lighter side, you may be doing that. You may be, obviously, you want to know plans, you want to know where is your submarine hiding, but by the Geneva Conventions, these are the only things you can compel, and it is my right to deny any other information beyond this. Why I am writing it? I not only, it's part of the right of a prisoner. He can say, sir, not more than this, and he's entitled. Now, roti, kapda or makan, whatever you are doing for your own soldiers, your camps have to have the same way for them. Obviously, I may not be able to immediately construct buildings or something. I may have tents, but then I have to ensure that proper food is given to them. There is proper shelter. They get their clothes. There is, like we in the armed forces, canteens are very, very, it's a very common thing in the, so you establish a canteen for them where they can buy their daily use items. Canteens are in addition to what you provide them. You know, in the food, there is a laid down food, right? Dal, roti, sabji, chawal, sweet, fruit, that is laid down. In addition to it, if I want to have Lays, I want to have a Coke. So there is a canteen where all these things you can go and buy. So you have to have neat and clean, proper quarters, basic food, clothing, and food stuff. So then again, you must ensure, like you do for your soldiers, when if anybody has the opportunity of visiting an army establishment, go and see how neat and clean these establishments are. Very for your health also, green area, proper sanitation. So similar type of provisions are required to be made for them also. Now, let me just put it across to you. There were lot of comments against the then government in 1972 that you had 93,000 prisoners with you. You could have twisted Pakistan's tail and got whatever you wanted, right? But let us take the other side. How difficult would it have been to follow the Geneva Conventions for 93,000 people? Give them all this roti, kapda or makan, give them all medical, religious, everything. And you have just fought a war. See the amount of massive expenses that would have taken place. And in addition to that, you know, the great influx from East Pakistan, which had already entered your country. You were not pushing back the refugees to East Pakistan. You did not, even after Bangladesh was created, you only allowed those people to go back who wanted to go back to Bangladesh. So see the additional burden. Could your country have taken that burden, and for how much time? So this probably could have been one of the reasons also for returning en masse the 93,000 people to the country, right? Right. So also medical facility, you must have a small infirmary where basic medical facilities are allowed, because in every army unit, you have a doctor and you have a small medical room where all these facilities are available. Now, religious, intellectual, and physical activities, you will take them out in limited times. You make them work also. You give them the opportunity of coming out, moving around. If they have for their religious activities, let's say every army unit, depending upon the size of the religion, like let's say a Jat regiment or a Rajput regiment or a Sikh regiment, the soldiers follow a particular religion. Officers follow the religion of the unit. There may be a Christian posted to a Sikh regiment, he will attend to Gurudwara, right? So, and then you have Sarv Dharm Sthal now in army stations, where under one roof you have Mandir, Masjid, Gurudwara, and church. So you profess whatever religion you want to profess. So for prisoners of wars also, you provide these same facilities to them. Now, in a unit, when the unit goes for war, Panditji or Granthiji or the Padri moves with the unit. They move with the unit. So suppose the Panditji is taken into custody, he becomes a prisoner of war. Then that Panditji is entitled to hold his mandir for his prisoners of war. That Qazi, or what we call in the religious guru in Muslims, if he is taken prisoner of war, he is entitled to have his people coming for namaz. So if they have been taken, fine. Otherwise, the detaining power provides these ministers for the purpose of their religious function, right? So if some intellectual, you want to read a book, you want to play some games in the evening, there are times, limited times as per the prison rules, and you are allowed that. I mentioned to you that I have also, I was a young school child, but I do remember, because in 62 war, my youngest uncle who participated in the 62 war. So we used to be very, very curious what is happening. And every day we would sit on the radio and hear the news. And after the war ended, then in the evening, there would be a special program where a prisoner would come and announce, I'm so-and-so, I'm in such and such custody, I'm being treated well, and all that. So you have to allow the prisoners to write letters and receive letters also. You may get some greeting cards or something. So a prisoner, like our own prisoner, in the armed forces, if a prisoner is, if there is a prisoner, we will allow him all these things, but there are timings for everything. Right? So similarly, a correspondence is permitted for and by a prisoner of war. I hope, Diwakar, I am not going too fast. Is it okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's okay.
Because,
perfectly okay.
Diwakar, I'm deliberately doing it in this manner because these are articles which the students can read, and I'm only trying to concise it for their benefit. Right?
It's crystal clear, sir. Yes, sir.
Now, coming to, if a prisoner of war commits an offense while he is in custody, right? Firstly, we are not trying him for the war. He's been taken into custody. And while in custody, while as a prisoner, he commits an offense. So then, since he's in the armed force, he's in the custody of the armed forces of the country, all such offenses will be tried by the law of the armed forces of the detaining power. Between India and Pakistan, if a prisoner of Pakistan Army's prisoner is taken, he will be tried by the Army Act by a court martial. Indian Army Act. He'll be tried by that. Now, the subsequent slides will show you. To our own soldier who is to be tried by a court martial, we have the same procedure which is prescribed by the Criminal Procedure Code of the country. Same procedure. He will be heard the summary of evidence will be recorded against him. Based on this evidence recorded, the commanding officer will take a decision what offense is made out. Then he will decide upon the mode of trial, whether a summary punishment will suffice or it's a serious offense. He should go for a court martial and then have a court martial assembled. And in the court martial, the accused is entitled to the same rights as a civilian is entitled in a criminal court. He is entitled to be defended by a counsel of his own choice. The army will provide him an officer who's known as a defending officer to assist him. And if he doesn't want a counsel, then the defending officer will take on the complete trial. So a prisoner from China or from Pakistan being tried under the Army Act, the prisoner can say, sir, I want my counsel coming from Pakistan and taking on my trial. He is entitled to a counsel of his choice, right? So he can say, sir, I want the counsel from India, so and so. If that so and so agrees, he can be tried by that. So he's permitted to be defended by a counsel of his choice, in addition to an officer provided as a defending officer to him. Now, same procedure follows of the Evidence Act: examination in chief, cross-examination, re-examination, defense witness, the accused coming as a witness on oath, calling his witnesses, producing evidence. Everything which the Army Act provides is made applicable to him. So the Geneva Convention talks about judicial proceedings and disciplinary proceedings. So they take disciplinary proceedings as a lighter proceeding and the judicial proceeding as the higher proceeding. So what I make out is, in the Army Act, you have summary trial where minor offenses are dealt with and minor punishments are awarded. And judicial proceeding, they are calling probably the court martial, because court martial is a judicial proceeding. So for serious offenses, you go for court martial, the judicial proceeding, and for others, now you can't double jeopardy. You can't try him again for the same offense. You can't have a special sentence awarded. Whatever is laid down, whatever is there at the time of commission of offense will apply. Okay. And then going for, if you go for, if award him a punishment, then he undergoes in the military custody, and you don't treat him in any way different than your own person. So you don't send him to for your minor offenses. If disciplinary punishment is there, then we in the army, the minor punishments for some detainment or something is in a quarter guard, where he's put with the guards. But we had military prisons for higher punishments, or if it's a very, very serious offense, then we transfer him to civil jail. So similar happens for a prisoner of war also, right? During his trial, he can write to somebody to get evidence, he can receive that, and all those things are permitted to him. I already told you that he has to be tried on a charge which is made out under your act. He will be made aware before the trial. He will be given a copy of the charge sheet, the evidence on which the prosecution will rely. Everything is provided to him in advance for preparing his defense. He has the same rights and meaning. I told you, he can have a counsel of his choice. He can call his witnesses and everything, right? So let's say we talk about Pakistan, a Pakistan prisoner was being tried. They can come and witness the trial. Court martial is an open court, unless the trial itself, the charge itself is of secret nature, where in-camera proceedings are to take place in that particular case. Otherwise, people are entitled to come and witness, including the party whose prisoner is with you. Now, in a court martial, the sentence is subject to confirmation by the superior authority. So similarly, once a sentence has been announced, once it is confirmed in accordance with the Army Act, it will be dealt with in the same manner as your person. And for women, I mentioned to you, like you treat your own women soldiers and women officers or women in your country, they will be treated accordingly. Like not actually concerned with this, but I must tell you that if a woman officer is being tried by a court martial, we will have women officers sitting in the court martial as jury. Not all, but there will be women officers sitting as jury. So similarly, if a woman POW is being tried, we will follow the same procedure, and she will be, once the sentence is awarded, she will be in the kept in a separate quarter. She will be under the supervision of women. No men will be allowed there. So from my side, I had this much only. Now, anything, any questions or anything that you wish to tell me? Can I stop sharing the screen?
Yes, sir. That was indeed a wonderful brainstorming and comprehensive session, sir. Proudly, we can say that Indian Army is world's most civilized army.
No doubt, no doubt.
Thank you, sir. Now, with your kind permission, may I take few of the questions?
Yes, yes, please, please.
Okay, sir. The first question I've received from one attendee is that custodial death, despite lots of disapproval, custodial death happens. What are the remedies?
What are the remedies is custodial death. If you are talking in the armed forces, it's not there. It's not there. Maybe in my 35 years, and I was the Judge Advocate General looking after this. It is basically the implementation. There are laws against the custodial death. The people have to be tried for that. Even in the international arena, people are tried for that. It is only the mindset and strict implementation of the laws that it can be done. You see, we keep making laws, but actually it is the implementation of the laws that and training in the armed forces. Every soldier posted on the border is provided with a do's and don'ts booklet. What as a soldier you can do under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, what you can't do. So we keep harping on that, but sometimes aberrations take place. So custodial death certainly should not take place, but it is strict implementation of the laws that can stop it.
Okay, thank you, sir. The next question I've received from one scholar is how war prisoners will secure human justice. War prisoners.
In what manner? You see, war prisoners secure justice if your country has committed an offense against a war. So firstly, within the own country, he can appeal. Let's say if he's tried by a court martial, which he feels is unjust to him, he has a right of appeal to the Armed Forces Tribunal, and he has a right to appeal to the Supreme Court of India. So within the country, he has two rights. And then, of course, if the country feels it's a war crime, then the International Court of Justice.
Thank you, sir. It was indeed a wonderful session. Now I welcome our academic coordinator, Monica Kharola ma'am, for a vote of thanks. Monica ma'am.
Thank you, Diwakar. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to hear our learned guest speaker for today, Major General Praveen Kumar Sharma. Sir, we have your experience in the armed forces has made this topic even more clear. Today, of course, after the atrocities and the huge crisis after World War I and World War II, the UN did, it has, and it is still working towards having a world where wars should not happen. But in spite of that, we have seen that we cannot free ourselves from this tendency of states to go into war. And in that case, we need this protection of prisoners of war, which is very essential because the armed forces personnel are doing their duty for the nation. And in that respect, if they are caught while doing that duty, they must be given all the rights that you have so well elaborated in your talk. And if humanity has to progress, we must see that we take these issues very seriously, and any kind of digression from there by any state should be taken very serious note of by the United Nations and by every country, so that people who are fighting for their country are not punished merely for doing their duty to the state. So thank you once again, sir. The participants, I'm sure, have learned, and we have had these recent examples of Abhinandan, who was the Indian Air Force personnel who was captured by Pakistan, and then within 60 hours he was sent back to India. So the students identify and they are able to recall that he gave only his name and rank. So that is how important it is for our personnel to be protected in situations where there is a warlike situation. Sir, on behalf of ICFAI University, Dehradun, I would like to thank you for being with us and for giving your insights into the topic. It was a highly learning session for us, and we have been, extremely benefited from it, and the students also are appreciating it. Thank you once again. I thank the organizer, Diwakar and Mriganshi ma'am, for doing this webinar by contacting you through the students. And yes, we are a very open university. We love to take inputs from our students and enhance their capability by making them part of every event that we try to host. So thank you once again, and thank you to the technical assistance that we have got from the university. Thank you to Dean sir for always supporting us and encouraging us. Thank you. Over to you, Diwakar.
Thank you, ma'am. Dean sir, your blessing words and closing remarks.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir. It was really very enlightening and informative for us also, that we have heard, we have come to know of many nuances of rights of prisoners. So I'm very much thankful to you and look forward to that we will in future also will be meeting online as well as if time permits, after when the COVID is not there, offline together and working for the benefit of the large students.
Anytime, sir. Anytime, sir. It will be a great pleasure. And in fact, I was just glancing through. Somebody was asking, how can I join the armed forces? So anytime, if you wish to have a separate session on that, I am available for that. Mutually, we can decide on that. For students, anytime, sir. Thank you so much for calling me.
Very kind of you, sir. We'll certainly have one session on that, sir.
Grateful, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you, Diwakar, and thank you, Dr. Monica and Dr. Wilson. Thank you very much.
Please allow me to close the session now, sir.
Please.
With your kind permission.
Sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. It was a nice one. Good.